China is adept at defying first impressions. From above, it looks like a perfectly assembled machine. High-speed trains, skyscrapers, contactless payments, and streets where almost everything can be ordered with a single touch. But just step off the main avenue, and a different country unfolds before you. A mountain village where the road depends on the weather, a market heavy with the scent of spices, a cramped apartment in a city growing in several directions at once, or an ancient temple lost among new buildings. Here, in a single day, you can ascend to the highlands, travel through a city built on slopes, and end the evening in a restaurant whose recipe is older than many nations. And for a foreigner, there is a distinct trap. Familiar maps, search engines, and payment methods can suddenly cease to be familiar. China does not merely present a different landscape. It offers a life lived within its own digital, urban, and cultural logic. Today, we will examine how real life in China functions beyond the picture-perfect postcard. We will talk about the country's scale, its cities, cuisine, women, family traditions, the 4 great inventions, high-speed trains, and the internet, which is a daily reality for locals but can become a foreigner's first serious ordeal. And in the end, we will answer the question, is China a country of the future, or a country where the future has simply learned to live alongside the past? Let us begin with a number that changes the perception of everything else. According to the World Bank, in 2025, China's population was approximately 1.406 billion people. This figure is no longer growing as it once did, and the country's demographic structure is changing. But even with slower growth, China remains a vast society where different regions can live in entirely different rhythms. Beijing and Shanghai set one pace: offices, subways, expensive real estate, a packed schedule, and constant competition. Sichuan offers another: spicy broth, a humid climate, and conversation around a round table. The Tibetan Plateau alters the very sense of distance, because altitude and thin air become part of daily life. In the Northwest, the space can be so vast that the nearest city becomes not a destination, but a separate journey in itself. China borders 14 states. The Encyclopedia Britannica, in its reference overview of China, specifically emphasizes the combination of a vast territory, diverse natural zones, and cultural regions. Therefore, the phrase "ordinary life in China" explains almost nothing. Ordinary for whom? For an office worker in Shenzhen, a farmer in Yunnan, or a student in Chengdu? It seems to me that this is where an honest conversation about the country begins. The more one tries to describe China with a single character, the faster it turns into a caricature. It needs to be seen not as one giant city, but as a collection of worlds connected by roads, state systems, and a shared written culture. And the first such connection was not the railway, but the Chinese character. Chinese writing has survived the change of dynasties, empires, political systems, and technologies. Historically, the same written language helped people from different regions maintain a connection even when their spoken languages differed. In modern China, Mandarin Chinese is used as the official standard, but in daily life, a person might speak Cantonese, Wu, Min, or another regional variant. UNESCO, in its materials on Chinese printing and written tradition, notes its role in the country's cultural memory. For a tourist, this means an unexpected thing. Sometimes an inscription on a screen or a sign helps you understand more than trying to decipher a conversation by ear. Characters look like drawings, but for a native speaker, it is not a picture, but a complex system of meanings, sounds, and context. The rarest characters can consist of a huge number of strokes. Yet in ordinary life, a person does not need to know every existing symbol. As with any writing system, there is an everyday set, professional terms, and rare forms. In ancient China, writing helped govern a vast territory. Today, its heir has become another system that a tourist notices almost immediately: the digital infrastructure. But before going online, it is worth seeing how China moves people. The reference mentions high-speed railways as a convenient advantage, and this is indeed one of the main ways to feel the country's scale. In an ordinary country, a train journey between cities can be a separate trip in itself. In China, the network of high-speed routes has turned many such trips into a planned part of a workday or a short vacation. According to the China State Railway Group, high-speed rail has become one of the country's main transportation systems. The carriages, stations, electronic tickets, and schedules create a feeling that distance can simply be switched off. But geography does not disappear. The climate, cuisine, and social rhythm outside the window change far more dramatically than one would expect from a single state. I like to look at China's railway not only as a technological achievement, it is also a way to gather the country into a single time system. When millions of people can move between regions on schedule, the labor market, tourism, education, and the very idea of far change. But such efficiency has a price. Train stations become enormous, cities compete for investment, and a person gets used to planning life with minute-by-minute precision. Inside big cities, this precision sometimes disappears. Because China knows how to build not only straight lines, Chongqing is one of the best examples of a city that looks as if the architect found the ordinary plane insufficient. The official portal of the Chongqing government describes it as a city with complex mountainous terrain, where roads, overpasses, metro stations, and buildings exist on different levels. You can get off a train, take an escalator up, and realize that the height you took for the first floor is the 10th floor for another building. Liziba Station became famous because of the metro line that passes through a residential complex. Videos often present this as proof of the complete madness of Chinese architecture. In reality, it is a compromise between building density, complex terrain, and the need to run transport where there is almost no free space. Yes, the train passes through a building, but that does not mean the residents live every day inside deafening roar. The station and structures are designed taking noise and vibration into account. Chongqing shows that the city of the future does not always look sterile and rectilinear. Sometimes it resembles a vertical labyrinth where space has to be used simultaneously above, below, and between buildings. For a tourist, it is a spectacle. For a resident, it is the road home, work, shopping, and the constant solving of the question, what level am I on now? If Chongqing is organized chaos, then Tekis in Xinjiang tries to solve the urban problem with geometry. The city plan is built around a central point and concentric roads. This pattern is often associated with the symbolism of the 8 trigrams and ancient Chinese tradition. What is interesting here is not how beautiful the map looks from above, but how the idea turns into the practical arrangement of streets. I believe that such cities break the usual tourist perspective. We are often surprised by buildings and bridges, but urban planning tells more about a country. It shows how society imagines order, through a straight axis, through rings, through vertical levels, or through the ability to constantly rearrange space. Now let us descend to where order is measured not by floors, but by available area. In Beijing, at various periods, there have been underground premises and former defensive structures that were used as housing for low-income people, migrant workers, and families unable to afford ordinary urban rent. In the media, such places are sometimes called an underground city and turned into a sensation. But behind this image lie quite concrete reasons: expensive real estate, migration to megacities, limited housing options, and urban governance policy. One cannot speak as if the majority of Chinese live underground. This is a marginal and heterogeneous part of urban reality, and many such premises were gradually closed or rebuilt over time. But the fact itself is important. A modern skyscraper city produces not only offices and shopping malls, but also a struggle for every square meter. It seems to me that this is where the convenient clickbait, secret underground China ends. The real story is more complex and therefore stronger. People do not choose dark premises because they like living in a secret world. They adapt to a market where work is concentrated in the city and housing close to it costs too much. From the housing issue, it is easy to move on to the price of an ordinary day. China is often presented as a country where everything is cheap. In one district, this may seem true. A bowl of noodles at a small family business, a local market, an inexpensive bus, a simple breakfast on the street. But in Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, or Guangzhou, rent, education, medical services, and good neighborhoods can cost quite differently. Therefore, within one city, there exist two economies. In the first, a person chooses simple food and uses public transport. In the second, he rents an apartment near a prestigious school, drives a car, buys imported products, and spends a significant part of his income on housing. For a tourist, this difference is easily masked. He can have a cheap lunch and decide that everyone lives like that. But the price of a bowl of noodles does not describe the cost of living. The World Bank, in its materials on China, examines the country's development through income growth, urbanization, and enormous changes in production and infrastructure. These are achievements on a large scale, but they do not cancel out the gaps between regions and population groups. Rapid development makes the country more convenient and at the same time raises the bar. Now people have to compete not only for jobs, but also for the city, school, housing, and access to opportunities. It seems to me that a tourist should remember this duality. China can be comfortable for a person with remote income and much more stressful for a local resident who counts rent every month. The phrase, "it's cheap here," without context almost always means cheap for someone specific. But there are costs that don't require a wallet. For example, competing with noise. In China, tea is not just a drink for a quiet ceremony. In one place, you'll be served clear green tea, in another, pour, in a third, a rich oolong. In the South, tea culture can be tied to family conversation, hospitality, and the ritual of serving. In a big city, tea appears in the office, restaurant, and vending machine with ready-made drinks. And alongside tea, a completely different engine of Chinese cuisine operates: Sichuan pepper and spicy broth. Hot pot, or huoguo, is built around a shared pot in which guests themselves cook meat, vegetables, tofu, and noodles. Britannica, in its reference on hot pot, describes precisely this logic of a communal dish that is cooked right at the table. It is not simply a set of ingredients. People sit around a single heat source, choose the level of spiciness, argue about cooking times, and gradually turn dinner into several hours of socializing. Sichuan pepper doesn't just burn. It produces a characteristic tingling and numbing sensation, making the spicy taste an almost physical adventure. After the first bite, someone reaches for water while someone else adds more pepper. This is where the difference lies between a cuisine that is watched and a cuisine that is lived in. A local resident perceives the taste not as an attraction, but as part of regional memory. In Guizhou, the cuisine can be even more sour and spicy. In Fujian, the soup Buddha jumps over the wall is known, where the complex composition and lengthy preparation are tied to festive and restaurant traditions. In other places, stinky tofu, fermented products, offal, and dozens of types of noodles are popular. It seems to me that Chinese cuisine best explains the structure of the country. There is no single dish that can be called authentic Chinese food. There is a vast map of regions, climate, available ingredients, migrations, and ways to preserve the taste of home, even when a family moves to another city. Britannica's reference on tea also shows how deeply the drink is connected with China's history, trade, and daily habits. It is through food that we approach the most clickbait element of the reference's title: women. Chinese women are often spoken about too lazily: beautiful, calm, traditional, or conversely, modern. But a person cannot be a national landscape decoration. In China, women work in universities, companies, medicine, manufacturing, trade, art, and small businesses. In large cities, they get an education, build careers, create their own projects, and have different attitudes toward marriage and family expectations. The country's history knows women who held real power. Britannica, in a biographical sketch of Wu Zetian, notes that Wu Zetian became the only woman in Chinese history to officially rule as emperor. Her path went through the court system, power struggles, and a complex political reputation. One cannot directly transpose her era into modernity, but the biography itself destroys the myth that women in Chinese history were always merely observers. Today, the conversation about Chinese women is tied not only to appearance, but also to choice. Education, work, marriage, caring for parents, the cost of housing, and family expectations can come into conflict. In some cities, a woman can live independently and postpone marriage. In another environment, pressure from relatives will be much stronger. A single Chinese experience does not exist. I support a simple principle. A person should be shown through their decisions, not through how well they fit someone else's clickbait. Beautiful people exist in any country, but how society gives them the opportunity to study, work, choose a partner, and manage their own lives is much more interesting and honest for a documentary narrative. The theme of family leads us to customs that cannot be understood from a single photograph. Among the Mosuo people, living mainly in the Yunnan and Sichuan regions by Lugu Lake, a matrilineal kinship structure is traditionally described, clan membership is passed through the female line, and women of the older generation play an important role in the common household. In popular culture, this system is sometimes simplified to phrases like, "they have no marriage," or "women choose men without restrictions." Reality is more complex. There are different forms of relationships, different historical periods, and differences between families. It is important not to turn the Mosuo into a living museum created to confirm someone else's fantasy. Any tradition changes under the influence of education, tourism, legislation, the market, and mobility. What an ethnographer described decades ago does not have to look exactly the same today. In Guizhou, one can meet representatives of the Miao people. Their festive costumes and silver ornaments often become a visual symbol of China. But behind the striking form lie technique, family skills, and the history of a specific group. In tourist retellings, there are also stories about festivals, where people symbolically say goodbye to former love. This does not mean that infidelity is allowed in China. The ritual of a specific community cannot be turned into a universal rule. It seems to me that traditions should be treated as living systems. It is possible to be surprised, but first one needs to find out exactly who observes the custom, what it means within the community, and how it has changed over time. Otherwise, the viewer gets not a documentary film, but a collection of exotic decorations. Now let us look at China through things that the whole world uses. Chinese paper is associated with the improvement of technology during the Eastern Han Dynasty, traditionally with the name of Kai Lun, and the turn of the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. Encyclopedia Britannica, in its history of technology, clarifies, paper did not arise from nothing, but its cheapening and convenience for writing changed the transmission of knowledge. The second great invention is gunpowder. The most famous version of its history begins with Taoist alchemists seeking the elixir of immortality. The mixture that was supposed to help prolong life began to burn and explode. First, gunpowder found use in signaling devices and fireworks, and then it became linked to war. The third is printing. In China, there existed the technique of woodblock printing, when an image or text was carved onto a wooden board and transferred to paper. Later, forms of movable type appeared. For world history, it is important not to argue who first invented every modern detail, but to understand that mass reproduction of text became possible long before the digital age. The fourth is the magnetic compass. It went from observations of the magnetic properties of materials to an instrument that helped with orientation and advanced long-distance travel. Encyclopedia Britannica, in its materials on the history of technology, notes China's contribution to these key directions. There is a beautiful phrase, as if paper was invented for writing and kites, gunpowder for fireworks, and then other civilizations found uses for these things in war and imperial expansion. Historically, the world is more complex, but the irony itself works. An invention never fully belongs to its creator. After its appearance, it begins to live in the hands of other people. I believe that the four inventions are important not as a reason for national pride, but as a reminder. Technologies travel between cultures. China was not an isolated box. Ideas, goods, and people moved along the Silk Road, through ports, steppes, and neighboring states. What today seems like a national invention often became part of the common history of humanity. But in the 21st century, China is creating a system that no longer simply travels around the world, but remains inside the country and defines everyday life. This is a digital ecosystem. A foreigner may arrive with a familiar set: Google Maps, YouTube, WhatsApp, a bank card, and a taxi-hailing app. In China, some of these services are unavailable, work unstably, or are replaced by local platforms. This is not a random breakdown, but a result of internet regulation, the local market, and its own digital infrastructure. Freedom House, in its Freedom on the Net report, describes China as an environment with very strict restrictions on online freedoms and control of digital content. This formulation is important because behind it lie not only the inconveniences of a tourist, but also a more serious question about who determines what a user can find, publish, and discuss online. For a resident of China, the digital environment, meanwhile, does not look empty. WeChat combines messages, payments, services, records, and many everyday functions. Weibo has become a major platform for public discussions. Douyin, the Chinese version of short videos, lives by its own rules and is not simply a copy of international services. For the user, this is not the internet without familiar brands, but an internet of their own, to which they have been accustomed since childhood. According to the China Internet Network Information Center, CNNIC, internet access in the country has a huge scale, and the number of users is measured in hundreds of millions. The World Bank, in its indicator of internet use, also records that by 2025, the majority of China's population used the internet. Therefore, it is important not to say that there is no internet in China. It exists, it is just arranged differently and obeys a different system of rules. A tourist encounters this difference at the moment of payment or navigation. A restaurant may prefer a QR code, a taxi, a local app, and a ticket, a digital account. What seems insignificant at home turns into a matter of preparation abroad. You need to check in advance the payment, communication, translator, and access to the necessary cards. It seems to me that digital China best illustrates the main paradox of this country. Within its own system, it can be surprisingly convenient. One phone replaces a wallet, a card, a ticket, and a chat. But this same system becomes opaque for a person who comes from the outside and expects that the whole world works through identical buttons. And this brings us to the most beautiful side of China, nature, which does not fit into a screen. The country's landscapes change faster than many can get used to a single region. In the southwest, the limestone peaks and rivers of Guilin form a landscape that has long become a symbol of Chinese painting. In Zhangjiajie, vertical stone pillars rise above the forest and mist. It was precisely such forms that inspired fantastic visual imagery, but real geology is more interesting than any computer graphics. In the west lies the Tibetan Plateau, often called the roof of the world. Here, it is not only the altitude and beautiful views that matter. The thin air, cold, distances, and complex logistics change daily life. A tourist can spend a few minutes at a panoramic viewing platform and leave, while local residents build their lives for years in conditions that a visitor's body experiences as a strain. To the north lie desert regions, including the Gobi. To the east are densely populated plains and megacities. Between these poles live species that have become symbols of nature conservation. The giant panda has long become an international image of China, but its history is tied to habitat loss, conservation programs, and the complex work of preserving bamboo forests. That is precisely why one cannot speak of China's nature only as a beautiful backdrop. Every natural symbol is connected to roads, tourism, land protection, climate, and the question of how many people a particular landscape can sustain. Sometimes the best view is not the one with the most visitors, but the one that has managed not to be turned into a stage set. Now we can return to the cities and see how nature responds to the pressure of the metropolis. In China, there are places where urban spaces look almost fantastical. UNESCO, in its description of the country's natural sites, also shows another side. Mountains, rivers, and forests here are not just a backdrop, but territories requiring protection and restrictions. This results in two strategies for living in space: Too compact? To raise? To tunnel through? Or to retreat to where nature still sets the rhythm? At an altitude of several thousand meters, communities live for whom the absence of trees and low temperatures are not a tourist anomaly, but a condition of life. In such areas, livestock, a stone house, heating, and a road are more important than a beautiful view. And in Shanghai, the same person can ride the subway line in the morning, work in a glass tower in the afternoon, and search for a restaurant in an old neighborhood in the evening. Between the old and the new, there is often not a museum, but an ordinary door. Behind it, a tea house, a family workshop, a temple, or a small restaurant. In front of it, an e-scooter, a camera, a QR code, and a flow of people. China's present has not chosen between antiquity and technology. It has linked them into one daily reality, sometimes harmoniously, sometimes conflictually. This is the difference between an advertising picture and real life. Advertising picks one image: beautiful people, skyscrapers, mountains, or national cuisine. Reality refuses to choose. It shows simultaneously a career and family pressure, cheap noodles and an expensive apartment, a convenient app and data surveillance, an ancient ritual, and a rigid work schedule. Chinese family life is particularly good at showing how old expectations meet a new society. Parents may expect from an adult child a stable job, marriage, and their own housing. A young person may want to study in another city, build a career, travel, or postpone marriage. In megacities, these desires collide with real estate prices and high competition. A wedding can be a big family event with red flowers, a banquet, and gifts, but it is not the same for everyone. For one couple, it is an important ritual. For another, a financial burden. For a third, a formality they want to keep as small as possible. The color red, the tea ceremony, the exchange of gifts, and respect for elders have different meanings in different families. It seems to me that respect for tradition begins where we stop considering it automatic. If a person chooses a ritual, it becomes part of a personal story. If a performance is demanded of them for the sake of relatives, the tradition turns into pressure. China is currently living within this debate, like many other societies, only the scale and speed of change make it especially noticeable. If you are interested in countries where a beautiful frame always hides a second system of rules, subscribe to the channel. Ahead is the final part, where we will gather all the contrasts: the city, the cuisine, the internet, nature, and family life, and examine why China seems simultaneously open and closed. Let us start with openness. Chinese goods, films, dishes, technologies, and inventions have long spread throughout the world. It is hard to find a country that does not use products of Chinese industry, does not know Kung Fu, has not tried noodles, or has not encountered Chinese platforms and brands. China is physically present in the daily lives of millions of people. Now about closedness. A person may know Chinese characters, watch videos about Shanghai, and order an item from a Chinese platform. But that still does not mean that they understand life inside the country. The domestic internet is regulated differently, social norms cannot be translated with a single dictionary, and huge regional differences do not fit into a tourist route. That is precisely why a Chinese metropolis can be incredibly convenient for a local resident and, strangely, inconvenient for a visitor. A local quickly pays for a purchase with a familiar application, navigates using local maps, knows where to find a proper breakfast, and understands the unspoken rules of queuing. A tourist sees a beautiful station, but does not know where to buy a ticket without a local account. The same city gives two people different impressions. The same is true for nature. A tourist sees the mountains as a picture, while a local sees them as a road, a water source, a place of work, a landslide risk, or a difficult path to the hospital. The same is true for tradition. A viewer sees an unusual costume, while a family sees the memory of several generations. The same is true for women. A camera may notice appearance, but real life consists of education, money, work, choice, and responsibility. I believe that China cannot be honestly described with the words the most unusual or the most beautiful. Such titles sound clickable, but they quickly impoverish the conversation. China is more interesting not because it constantly shocks, but because it forces one to hold several truths in one's head at the same time. It is a country of ancient script and digital platforms, a country of family ritual and fierce competition, a country of cheap street food and expensive real estate, a country of cities that grow vertically and mountains where a person still depends on the weather, a country where the internet can be convenient and, at the same time, strictly regulated. Therefore, the answer to the main question sounds like this. China is not just a country of the future and not a museum of the past. It is a country that is trying to integrate the future into an already existing civilization without destroying its ties. Sometimes the result looks fantastic, sometimes disturbing, and sometimes just very mundane. And it is precisely in this ordinariness that real life hides. If you were offered to spend one day in China, what would you choose? A high-speed train between megacities, the streets of Chongqing, hot pot in Sichuan, the mountains of Zhangjiajie, a tea ceremony, or a walk through the old quarter of Shanghai? Write in the comments which route you would check first. Subscribe to the channel if you want to look at countries not through a single beautiful shot, but through the system that stands behind it. Because China surprises not by being far from us, it surprises by how many familiar things can work according to completely different rules. Until the next journey.